Good evening. Surely we can do better than that. Good evening. Much better. Certainly we thank you, members of the Shiloh Baptist Church Choir, and we welcome you to this remembrance of Benjamin Thomas, who was lynched across the street from where we are gathered at the corner of Fairfax and King Streets 123 years ago on August 8th, 1899. I'd like for a moment to pause and recognize our public officials and city leaders who are attending this evening. First, we have former mayor of the City of Alexandria, Bill Ewell. Sheriff for Alexandria, with whom we will hear from in a moment, Sean Casey. Deputy City Manager, Emily Baker. Helen McVean over housing. Rose Dawson, who is over the libraries for the City of Alexandria. Jean Kellner, who's over human rights for the City of Alexandria. Gretchen Boulevard, Historic Alexandria. And Audrey Davis, who's the director of the Alexandria Black History Museum. And Gloria Sinton, City Clerk. Of special note, the artist Nicole Wandra designed this special chalk art work for this event. The artist's statement is included in your program. Originally intended for the brick in front of the stage, today's flash rain storm altered her plans, but she quickly pivoted. So we thank you, Nicole, for sharing your talent with us today to honor Benjamin Thomas and the heroes who tried to stop the lynching. We are also fortunate to have with us this evening the entire Shiloh Baptist Church Choir and its under-shepherd, Reverend Taft Quincy Heatley. Shiloh Baptist Church was the Thomas family's church home, and the pastor and the congregation at that time played a pivotal role in the protesting of the lynching, as well as its younger members. We also want to recognize Alexandria City High School students who are with us today. They are going to share with us the story of what happened on Monday, August 7th, and Tuesday, August 8th, 1899. We also would like to recognize City Manager Jim Perjon, as well as Councilmember Sarah Bagley with us this evening.
Good evening. I'm Amel Maldali. At 8 p.m. on Monday night, August 7th, 1899, police officer Herbert Knight and William Wilkinson knocked on the Thomas family's front door at 700 North Patrick Street. A warrant for the arrest of 16-year-old Benjamin Thomas, a Black Alexandrian, had been sworn out by the next-door neighbor, Edward Clark, a white man of a few means who worked as a dairyman selling milk and doing odd jobs, who claimed that Benjamin had assaulted his 7-year-old daughter. Thomas said he was innocent, a claim from which he never once wavered. The police officers arrested Benjamin and took him to the station house, where they charged him with attempted criminal assault, making him eligible for the death penalty. If he was found guilty, he was held overnight in a cell at the station house on the east side of the City Hall.
I'm Naeem Scott. The African American and Native Alexandrian James Turley was on his way home from the brickyards where he had to work late that night. He met a group of white men who were loudly threatening to lynch some Negro. Turley said he retraced his steps to find out if a black man had been arrested, and if so, what he was arrested for, knowing that a sexual assault was a death warrant. The black community would not let what happened 2 years earlier to brother Joseph McCoy happen again. They would organize and defend the prisoner. Turley was from an old established family in this city, and he was a leader among Alexandria's colored Republicans. When he learned that Benjamin Thomas was locked up at the station house for an alleged crime that often resulted in the lynching of African Americans, he sought out fellow chiefs, including Captain Albert Green, a sergeant at arms and head of Robinson's Industrial Guards, John Nelson, and William Washington. They went to the station house and reported that white men were threatening to lynch Benjamin, and they offered their assistance to the police to keep him safe. The police didn't find their concerns credible, and they sent them away. But Thomas's defenders had no intention of leaving. Captain Green organized at least 100 men and posted them at street corners near the station house, while his colleagues went to alert Mayor George Simpson of the plot to lynch the boy. It was just after midnight when Mayor Simpson answered the knock at his door. After hearing their concerns, Simpson denied that Benjamin was in any danger. He told them to go home for the night. At 1 a.m, Police Lieutenant James Smith went to Mayor Simpson's house to tell him that African Americans were positioned around the station house, and a few were even marching up and down Fairfax Street. The mayor told him to pull officers off their beats and order them back at the station house in case they needed to defend it from an attack by the black Alexandrians. Simpson also told Lieutenant Smith to tell the blacks to go home, and if they refused, arrest them. Lieutenant Smith did as the mayor bid. He organized his squad and deputized several white citizens who were at the station to complain that black men were gathering in the streets. Then he and his crew confronted Thomas's defenders on the corner of Cameron and Fairfax Streets. Lieutenant Smith told them all to go home or they would be arrested. Captain Green refused and told the police, "We will not leave Benjamin Thomas unprotected. Every one of us are willing to give up our lives to keep him safe from the lynch mob." Green was arrested, as was Alan Carter. They were taken to the station house and charged with disorderly conduct and attempting to incite a riot. With Green and Carter gone, the white police officers tried to force the others to disperse, driving Thomas's defenders several blocks north on Fairfax Street. The black defenders halted at Hard Corner, where Princess meets Fairfax Street in the Burgh, and squarely faced the white officers of the law. The black men persisted. They would not abandon their posts or Benjamin. The standoff was tense. James Turley and Richard Washington told their brethren, "Stand your ground." At this, Lieutenant Smith reportedly lost all patience and rushed into the crowd, followed by his officers who arrested Turley, Washington, and at least a dozen other men. The charges against James Turley, Edward Gibson, Alfred Mason, and Harry McDonald included disorderly conduct, carrying a concealed weapon, and attempting to incite a riot. On Tuesday morning, they were fined $20. Green and Carter will also find $20. Robert Butler, John Haskins, James Alexander, Edward Payne, Thomas Elzey, Richard Washington, John Nelson, William Washington, and James Wilson were all charged with disorderly conduct and attempting to incite a riot. They were fined $10. All but 2 of those charges went to the chain gang because they were unable to pay the costly fines. That would amount to more than $700 and more than $350 today. After the hearing for Thomas's defenders on Tuesday morning, Mayor Simpson reiterated that Benjamin Thomas was never in the slightest danger, yet colored people had attempted to incite a riot, which might have been easily led to the lynching they say they wanted to prevent. After the lynching of Benjamin Thomas, it was reported that police officers testified at the trial of Thomas's defenders that the Black Alexandrians were threatening the lives of white people. This, the papers wrote, incensed white Alexandrian and set the stage for the lynching.
Hello, my name is Rhodus. On Tuesday morning, August 8, 1899, Benjamin Thomas was in the mayor's court in City Hall when his 7-year-old accuser, Lillian, took the stand. She testified that when she went next door, he was sitting on the stairs just inside the doorway. When she asked for the axe that he had borrowed from her family, she said he drew her towards him, messed with her clothing, and tried to take liberties with her. The evidence was very meager, according to the Black Alexandrian freedman Murray, who wrote in his diary that the little girl said he pulled up her clothes. The Baltimore Sun later wrote, the offense for which the Negro Ben Thomas suffered did not include any violence to the person of the child, but on her complaints of the way Thomas had treated her. But on that day in the mayor's court, no one testified on Benjamin's behalf. Mayor George Simpson placed him in the custody of the city sergeant until the next session of Alexandria City Court, when he would be brought before a grand jury. Officer Ferguson escorted Thomas to the jail at the corner of St. Asaph and Princess Street. A gang of white boys and men followed behind him. A group of black men who were determined to protect Benjamin followed too. By Tuesday afternoon, it was generally known that an attempt would be made to lynch Benjamin Thomas. The shelves of the gun shops and hardware stores were emptied of anything that could be used as a weapon. In response, Deputy City Sergeant B.B. Smith, who was in charge of the jail, asked the Chief of Police, James Webster, to send a squad of officers to the jail to stay the night. Chief Webster chose 4 guards, and Mayor Simpson deputized 10 white Alexandrians. 14 additional men would guard the jail. As the afternoon wore into evening, white men were armed with pistols, shoulder rifles, and shotguns walked the street, and as the sun set, the rough elements were getting drunk on whiskey.
Good evening, my name is Miracle Gross. At 11 p.m., more than 500 white men crowded around the jailhouse, wildly demanding that the police hand Benjamin Thomas over to them. City Attorney Gardner Booth, Attorney Samuel Brent, and Mayor Simpson arrived on the scene and pleaded with the mob to leave. 2 times, Mayor Simpson pleaded to the lynch mob to let the law take its course. He promised to convene a grand jury the next day, which would surely be followed by a legal hanging. And he added, if the jury did not find Thomas guilty, then he said, I give you my word as a man of honor that I will personally lead a mob tomorrow to lynch Thomas. The mayor only convinced a few men to change course and join him. The growling throng threw the mayor aside and started ramming the jail door with a giant piece of wood stolen from a construction site. Officers fired a warning round of bullets. The lynchers fired back, and the guards retreated to a safer part of the jail. Mayor Simpson picked himself up off the ground, giving up and permitting mischief to take what course it would, according to news reports. At this point, some black Alexandrians appeared north on St. Asaph Street. They charged the mob. The whites turned their guns on them and fired, hitting George Hammond in the back, forcing Thomas's defenders to retreat. Inside of the jail, the ringleaders broke down an iron door with an axe, took the warden's keys, and invaded the corridor. Prisoners were terrorized in their cells by the lynchers as they searched for Benjamin. They grabbed Bowden Rao and started toward the door with him, but quickly realized that he was not Benjamin. They roughly dragged John Doggan from his cell and threw him into the street. He was nearly strangled before someone insisted he was not the boy that they were after. All this time, 16-year-old Benjamin Thomas was crouching in a barrel of fish in the dark corner of a prison basement. After an exhaustive search of cells, the ringleaders moved to the cellar and rooted around. They knocked the barrel over, and Thomas poured onto the floor with the fish. Outside, a piercing yell alerted the others that they had found their prey. They emerged from the prison with Benjamin held tightly between them. Officer Wilkinson drew his pistols. "That's the wrong man," he said. The mob, excited but dubious, after two men were misidentified, let Thomas go. Benjamin started to run. He was shot, but not seriously. He made his way to the vestibule of a nearby house. The ladies of the house screamed. A few of the white lynchers who knew Benjamin declared that he was the right man. A rope was wrapped around his chest. It jerked and he fell to the ground. The lynchers held the other end of the rope. They ran down St. Asaph Street, dragging Benjamin, first on his back and then on his face, the rough cobblestones battering his head. The white boys and men shot their pistols into the air while Benjamin tried to free himself. They kicked him and threw rocks at him. He moaned, he groaned, he cried out for his mother. By the time they had dragged the boy half a mile to the electric lamppost across the street from Market Square, his clothes were nothing but remnants. Benjamin Thomas, bloody, beaten, and shot, were nothing but his shoes. 20 minutes went by, but Benjamin was still breathing. Officer Wilkinson cut him down and laid him on the street. He drew his gun to hold the crowd at bay, but they rushed in anyway, kicking and beating him a full minute before someone put his pistol against the young boy's chest, pulled the trigger, and ended Benjamin's life.
Dr. Jones examined Benjamin Thomas's body and testified at the coroner's inquiry that his neck was never broken. Thomas had been shot several times. 2 balls passed through his lungs and heart. The other bullet ripped open his abdomen and his small intestines. It was a gunshot to the heart that killed Benjamin, according to Dr. Jones. Police Chief Webster, Officer James Hall, Tim Hayes, the jailer, Deputy Sergeant B.B. Smith, and a deputized citizen called Wilbert Baggett testified that they did everything they could to protect Benjamin. But some white Alexandrians came out against the police, saying that they practically surrendered the prisoner without opposition or protest. City Hall janitor John Craven, a white man, agreed, saying that Chief Webster didn't make the proper effort to check the mob, and he accused Deputy Sergeant Smith of being anxious to see Benjamin Thomas lynched. At the inquiry, the chief, deputy sergeant, and officers testified that they did not recognize a single person in the mob. City Attorney Gardiner Booth was at the jail with the mayor when he spoke with the lynch mob. The Evening Star newspaper wrote, quote, "The lynchers wore no masks, and it is held that the mayor and the police were reasonably close to them." At the conclusion of the inquest, the verdict was read. "We, the jury, find that Benjamin Thomas came to his death by the hands of a mob, the members of which are unknown to the jury, immediate cause of death being due to the gunshot wound of the heart." Some black Alexandrians attended the coroner's inquiry, a small protest, as human rights witnesses, and after the verdict was rendered, they were visibly upset.
Good evening. Just gonna wait for the plane to go by. Please join me in thanking these remarkable students for the words they just provided us. Thank you for your words, your powerful presence, and your commitment to telling the story, the true and full story of what happened to Benjamin Thomas 123 years ago. The words I share today cannot compare to those we just heard. But like Chief Hayes, Chief Brown before him, and my predecessor, Sheriff Lawhorn, I speak to you today because we won't hide behind our badge or a false history. Our profession's history of racial oppression and white supremacy cannot be overlooked, and it should not be overlooked. Yet some people ask, shouldn't we just move on? Why do we have to keep bringing up the past? In Alexandria, we value the past, don't we? We have historic districts and architecture and museums that make our city a destination. We welcome visitors here to explore our history, and we attract newcomers and businesses who see Alexandria's rich history as an asset. They want to walk down cobblestone streets and see where George Washington dined and danced. But we cannot simply cherry pick and celebrate the proud moments that we are comfortable with. We cannot just acknowledge the history that suits us. And this is definitely the case in law enforcement, where we recognize with deep regret how our history oppressed others. Through the slave patrols where early policing in much of the South began, and then holding those who captured our local jail so they could be returned to their enslavers. Even after freedom, law enforcement continued to oppress blacks through convict leasing and enforcement of Jim Crow laws. In violent white-on-black crimes, including sexual assaults, police often fail to properly investigate crimes committed against African Americans. Police abuse their authority by refusing to intervene when white mobs attacked peaceful civil rights activists and targeted peaceful demonstrators with violence themselves. More recently, law enforcement relied on racial profiling, and only in the past few years have we begun to address unconscious bias. Our profession must recognize and apologize for its major role in racial oppression, and today, specifically, our part in the lynchings of thousands of African Americans through inaction or by deliberate action. In working with the Alexandria Community Remembrance Project and the Equal Justice Initiative, we acknowledge this difficult and painful history, and we are deeply sorry. I apologize for our predecessors, the Alexandria Police Department, jail staff, and law enforcement leadership, who not only failed to protect young Benjamin Thomas, but who took actions that allowed the lynching to occur, the assailants to go free, and the brave community members seeking to keep him safe to be arrested. To ensure this history is known, both the Sheriff's Office and the Police Department share the facts of Benjamin Thomas and Joseph McCoy's lynching with our staff. We refuse to hide this history. We will remember Benjamin Thomas and the courageous citizens who risked their own freedom to protect him. And I pledge to work with the Alexandria Community Remembrance Project and support their efforts as they move forward, shining a light on the truth and working towards reconciliation. Thank you.
Esteemed faith leaders, representatives of Alexandria's community, political representatives, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone gathered here today to commemorate the life and death of Benjamin Thomas and the loving community from which he hailed. I'm honored to participate in this commemoration by offering a poem. As I read about and reflected on the events of those tragic days in 1899, I was especially struck by the fact that Benjamin Thomas called out for his mother in his final moments. This reminded me of George Floyd calling out for his mother 121 years later as he was being suffocated by a police officer. Such parallel events should remind us all that these acts of violence against Black people are not only part of our history, but they continue to the present day. We must continue to be aware of such injustice and to fight it every day. In memory of Benjamin Thomas, 1883 to 1899. A sense of foreboding spread through Alexandria's streets the night before the lynching. The crescent moon, as it set in the western sky, illumined scores of Black men who gathered to protect Benjamin Thomas as he languished in his jail cell. But the mayor and police halted the community's heroic efforts like a raging fire can silence a town. Alone and vulnerable, Thomas would later emit a scream from the depth of his being, the primal cry to his mother for succor in his final moments. Let us honor this voice and this bright life beyond his gruesome death, this once vibrant body full of promise, now tortured and maimed and hanged until lifeless. With his lynching, a piece of us was killed too. We wear the same shroud. How do we make sense of Benjamin Thomas's short life? If we callously allow simple hemp fibers to become a noose, a poplar tree or a lamppost to become a gallows, what will we fashion of our history books? His life breath, usurped violently, is like ours, fragile and full of human spirit, innocent and vital, one with our mother breath. May our grief over his cruel loss impel us to action. May his memory nourish our resolve.
Thank you both for those words. Now, in recognition of Benjamin Thomas, let us listen to the words of that famous poet, Langston Hughes, who wrote this poem, Christ in Alabama, in April 1932. This poem, Christ in Alabama, is about, metaphorically, the crucifixion of many African Americans and others to signify the historic practice of lynching. Christ in Alabama, Langston Hughes writes, Christ is a nigger, beaten and black. Oh, bare your back. Mary, his mother, Mammy of the South, silence your mouth. God, his father, white master above, grant us your love. Frederick Douglass once said, a white man who has to but blacken his face and commit a crime, to have some Negro lynched in his stead. An abandoned woman has only to start the cry that she has been insulted by a black man to have him arrested and summarily murdered by the mob. Benjamin Thomas was innocent. Let us say his name, Benjamin Thomas. On Monday, August 7th, 1899, the African American community in Alexandria rose up to protect one of their own who had been accused of attempting to assault the little white girl who lived next door. Benjamin Thomas, just 16 years old, the son of Elizabeth and George Thomas, was arrested at 8 p.m. that night, setting off a chain of protest from the black community that reverberated throughout time to this very day. Of the 16 men whose names we know from newspaper accounts, five of them were younger than 30. 7 were between 30 and 50 years old. At least 7 served in the military at some point, 6 of those during wartime. 6 were active Republicans who held leadership positions in the party that was truly inclusive at the time. Some of these men were also members of the Colored Odd Fellows, and 4 were parts of the black community who had been free before emancipation. As I read each hero's name, with those who are representing the heroes, please stand and remain standing. And if anyone is a descendant of the heroes, I ask that they remain standing. As I say the name of each hero, I invite you to respond to as prompted. Mr. James Alexander.
James Alexander.
Robert Buckner.
Say his name.
Alan Carter.
Say his name.
John Thomas Izizu.
Say his name.
Edward Gibson.
Say his name.
Albert Green.
Say his name.
John Haskins.
Say his name.
Harry McDonald.
Say his name.
Alfred Mason.
Say his name.
John Nelson.
Say his name.
Edward Payne.
Say his name.
James Turley.
Say his name.
Richard Washington.
Say his name.
William Washington.
Say his name.
John Wilson.
Say his name.
Please remain standing as we now invite representatives and families of the men who were in prison with Benjamin and subject to terror from the white mob to stand and be recognized. John Dogan. Bowden Rowe.
Say his name.
For the man who was shot trying to stop the lynch mob. George Hammond.
Say his name.
For another mother who raised her voice to protest racial terror. Susan Gordon.
Say her name.
For the man who led the Colored Odd Fellows in raising money for the Thomas family. James Buckner.
Say his name.
And for the man representing the National Organized Brotherhood of Afro-Americans who courageously came to Alexandria in the wake of the lynching to investigate what happened, Reverend Hart.
Say his name.
You may be seated. Alexandria's black community did not stop defending Benjamin when his life went out of him. They continued to witness. They showed up at the coroners, demanding inquiry to encourage the white community to uphold the law and to find the members of the lynch mob and to hold the members of the lynch mob responsible. Because they rose up, while Benjamin's body lay in Demon's funeral home, it was visited by hundreds of people from the black community. But because they rose up, servants from the District of Columbia, Alexandria, and the countryside refused to go to work for their white employers. Because they rose up,
We can rise higher.
the Harmony Lodge of the Colored Odd Fellows, led by Mr. James Buckner, led a cakewalk to raise money for the Thomas family. Because they rose up,
We can rise higher.
secret meetings were held to plan a mass protest, as well as to try to find a way to move Benjamin's remains from a pauper's grave to Douglas Cemetery. Because they rose up,
We can rise higher.
on August 28th, a memorial service for Benjamin Thomas was held at Shiloh Baptist Church. It called for a mass meeting. More than 600 black brothers and sisters from Washington, D.C. and Alexandria attended. Reverend Warren called upon black Alexandrians to boycott every white business in Alexandria that had a hand in the lynching of Benjamin Thomas. Reverend W.D. Loving of Ebenezer Baptist Church on Queen Street, Reverend Johnson of Beulah Baptist Church on South Washington Street, and Reverend J.J. Loving of Enon Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. all spoke up for Benjamin Thomas on that day. Because the black men and women rose up for what was right, they stood up for the law, they stood up for justice, they stood up for equality, they stood up for equity, and because they stood up, because they rose up,
We can rise higher.
From the great emancipator, William Guard, who freed himself and 22 black Alexandrians from the bonds of slavery, to Moses Hepburn, George Parker, and George Seaton, to every black man and woman who experienced an indignity with grace, resisted injustice with nonviolence, and wore this nation's colors in war, who supported Martin King's good fight for civil rights, who strove to improve education for all school children, who joined hands with white brothers and sisters, and since at the death of George Floyd, to all of our ancestors and our allies, we say because they rose up,
We can rise higher.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand.
Choir continues to sing.
We'll walk
Let us process to the lynching site.
We'll walk hand in hand someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday.
In Genesis, the 4th chapter, the 10th verse, the Lord God poses a question because of an injustice that has just occurred. He asked the question, "What have you done?" The reason he asked that question is because of what the Lord God heard. He said, "I can hear the blood of your brother crying out to me from the earth." Alexandria, what have you done? America, what have you done? There is too much crying of unjust blood from the grounds of this nation which we call land of the free and home of the brave. What have you done? I can hear the cries every time I step into a car that I pay for in a free land and drive where I choose to go. But those flashing blue lights always cause me to pause. Alexandria, what have you done? I can hear the cries that my Father in heaven hears every time I look in the eyes of my 8-year-old son. And he asks, why is it that I can't have certain toys or go to certain places? And with my adult wisdom and grown self, I have to tell him, one day you may understand, but right now, you have to trust your Father. There are some things that although you are free, you have a different responsibility than those of your neighbors who have a different you. America, what have you done? If we could be honest, I'm tired of singing. I'm tired of singing "We Shall Overcome." I'm tired of singing these songs at these remembrances. And although we celebrate the city for taking the time out to bring remembrance of something that occurred 123 years ago, Alexandria, I ask you the question. When you venture down into Old Town for recreation, for fun and joy in this great land, do you hear the blood crying from the ground? I can tell you how to hear it. But first, you have to see me as your brother. You have to see those who look differently from you as your brothers and sisters. And when you respect their humanity with intellectual humility, because they have an education that cannot be learned in the hallowed halls of Ivy League schools. They have an education that cannot be read in a book. They have an education that's called their existential reality. And because it's different, does not mean it's deficient. Learn from us as we learn from you. Because to say that equality is really equal, that means nothing is higher than the total of those two things, those two variables. If X equals Y, Y is not greater than X, and X is not greater than Y. They're the same. And I promise you, there is a lot that we have in common, more so than we have different. And if you can see me and see your neighbor, and as Christ said, love your neighbor as yourself, maybe your hearing will change. Maybe you'll gain some new sight. Maybe your feeling will shift. Maybe your sense of smell will be just a little bit sweeter. That comes from smelling something that is so rotten. What have you done? Well, the more important question is, what will you do? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, because that's who I represent, I pray that we can see one another, and maybe then we'll overcome. Choir. We're not tired of singing this, y'all can sing too.
I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. For all to see, I'm gonna let it shine. For all to see, I'm gonna let it shine. For all to see, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
If we could all just go in the grace and love, recognizing that we are all God's children, then our lights will shine. If you can, turn to your neighbor on your right or left. If you want to hug them, you can. But because of COVID, if you want to give an air hug, you can do that as well. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for coming out.